Imagine this. You're losing the war, your followers are dropping off like flies, and one by one, the objects that keep you alive, your Horcruxes, are being destroyed. Your no longer so secret key to eternal life is failing. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but there seems to be a pretty obvious solution here. Just make more. So why didn't he? Why didn't Voldemort, the moment he realized his soul fragments were being destroyed, simply create more Horcruxes? 2 more, 4 more, 40 more. He knew the magic and he knew the consequences. So what stood in his way? Today we'll be diving into all of this and more as we unpack the convoluted topic of Voldemort's Horcruxes. Let's dive into it. Hey everyone, welcome to another installment of Harry Potter Theory. By the time the Battle of Hogwarts rolls around, Voldemort's on his last legs. Because by this point in the story, Voldemort's biggest advantage, his supposed immortality, is collapsing around him. One by one, the Horcruxes he created over decades are being destroyed. First the diary, then the ring, then the locket, then the cup, then the diadem, and eventually even Nagini. And each time one of these objects is destroyed, a significant portion of Voldemort's already fractured soul disappears forever. But here's the thing. Despite his connection with Harry, Voldemort didn't actually know this was happening until very late in the game. In fact, for most of the series, he operates under the dangerous assumption that if one of his Horcruxes were destroyed, he would feel it. Given that these fragments were pieces of his own soul, he thought that surely their destruction would send some kind of shock through him, some sort of magical signal that something had gone wrong. But when we finally get a glimpse inside of Voldemort's mind in Deathly Hallows, we see that this assumption simply isn't true. But surely if the boy had destroyed any of his Horcruxes, he, Lord Voldemort, would have known, would have felt it. He, the greatest wizard of them all, he, the most powerful, the killer of Dumbledore and of how many other worthless, nameless men. How could Lord Voldemort not have known if he himself, most important and precious, had been attacked, mutilated? True, he had not felt it when the diary had been destroyed, but he had thought that was because he had no body to feel, being less than ghost. No, surely the rest was safe. The other Horcruxes must be intact. In fact, Voldemort only discovers that his Horcruxes are being destroyed as late as May 1st, 1998, right at the precipice of the final battle. What did you say to me? His voice was high and cold, but fury and fear burned inside him. The one thing that he had dreaded, but it could not be true. He could not see how. The goblin was trembling, unable to meet the red eyes high above his. "Say it again," murmured Voldemort. "Say it again." My lord," stammered the goblin, its black eyes wide with terror. My lord, we tried to stop them. Imposters, my lord, broke into the stranger's vault." "Imposters? What imposters? I thought Gringotts had ways of revealing imposters. Who were they?" It was the Potter boy and the two accomplices." "And they took," he said, his voice rising, a terrible fear gripping him. "Tell me, what did they take?" "A small golden cup, my lord." The scream of rage, of denial left him as if it were a stranger's. He was crazed, frenzied. It could not be true. It was impossible. Nobody had known. How was it possible that the boy could have discovered his secret? Alone amongst the dead, he stormed up and down, and they passed before him in vision. His treasures, his safeguards, his anchors to immortality. The diary was destroyed and the cup was stolen. What if the boy knew about the others? Could he know? Had he already acted? Had he traced more of them? Was Dumbledore at the root of this? Dumbledore, who had always suspected him? Dumbledore dead on his orders? Dumbledore, whose wand was his now, yet who reached out from the ignominy of death through the boy? The boy. However, despite the incredibly small window of just one day between Voldemort's horrific discovery and the final battle, this, at least to me, does present an opportunity. Sure, I suppose Voldemort didn't know he was going to die the next day, nor did he know exactly how many Horcruxes had been destroyed. But still, he knew something was wrong, which is why he made the decision to immediately begin checking on the remaining hiding places himself. After learning that the cup had been stolen from the Lestrange vault, Voldemort panics and begins mentally retracing the locations where he had hidden his Horcruxes. Through Harry's connection to him, we see that Voldemort travels first to the Gaunt Shack, where he discovers that the ring is already gone, confirming that Dumbledore must have found it years earlier. From there, he heads to the seaside cave where he had hidden Slytherin's locket, only to realize that it too has vanished. In that moment, Voldemort understands the horrifying truth. Someone has discovered his secret and has already begun destroying the anchors to his immortality. And it's this same realization that finally sends him racing toward Hogwarts, where he believes the final hidden Horcrux, Ravenclaw's diadem, may now be in danger. For the first time in decades, Voldemort understood that the secret he had built his entire existence around had been discovered. The Horcruxes, his anchors to immortality, were no longer safe. And that realization triggers something we almost never see from Voldemort: panic. From this moment, Voldemort abandons caution entirely. He goes all over the place in search of the Horcruxes, desperately hoping that they'll be right where he left them. But interestingly, there's something he never attempts during this frantic search. He never tries to create another Horcrux. Which brings us back to the central question: why? I suppose it's easy for me to say, but if I were Voldemort, I think I would have at least tried to make one more. One completely unknown to Harry, Dumbledore, and whoever else may have contributed to the destruction of the others. Kill someone, split the soul again, and hide the fragment. Problem solved, right? Unfortunately, that's not exactly as straightforward as it sounds, and there are actually several very important reasons why he didn't. The first reason being his unusual obsession with the magical number 7. Voldemort strongly believed that the number 7 was of particular importance in achieving immortality in its strongest form. When he spoke with Slughorn, one of the goals of the conversation was to confirm that 7 pieces of soul would make the concept of immortality through Horcruxes even more powerful. He also felt that splitting his soul into more than 7 pieces would somehow lessen the strength of the power. A conversation between Harry and Dumbledore supports this. Wouldn't it be better, make you stronger, to have your soul in more pieces? I mean, for instance, isn't 7 the most powerfully magical number? Wouldn't 7? Harry asked. Yes, I think the idea of a 7-part soul would greatly appeal to Lord Voldemort. Because of this, Harry is under the impression that Voldemort would need to create 7 Horcruxes, a statement which Dumbledore corrects. No, Harry, not 7 Horcruxes, 6. The 7th part of his soul, however maimed, resides inside his regenerated body. What this confirms is that Voldemort's fixation with the number 7 and it being the most magical number is one of the primary reasons he avoided creating additional Horcruxes, because he felt that it would provide him with the highest level of protection. While I won't argue that 7 isn't the most powerful magical number in the Harry Potter universe, I would argue that focusing so much on 7 in this particular instance feels a bit arbitrary. Horcrux magic was largely uncharted territory, meaning there was almost certainly no precedent for Voldemort to follow, and no clear reason that the number 7 would carry special significance in this specific context. The next big reason is that Voldemort's soul was already very damaged. This all comes back to how Horcrux creation actually works. The process begins with murder. In the Harry Potter universe, killing another person doesn't just end a life. It literally tears the killer's soul apart. And it's that tear that makes Horcrux creation possible. The wizard performing the ritual then uses dark magic to separate the damaged fragment from their body and bind it to an external object. That object then becomes a Horcrux, acting as a container for that fragment of soul, tethering the wizard to life as long as the fragment survives. However, the problem here is that each time this process happens, the wizard's remaining soul becomes less whole, which brings me to a common misconception about Horcrux creation. When Voldemort creates multiple Horcruxes, many believe that he is splitting his original soul into equal pieces. There are 2 interpretations of this. The first being that every time he makes a subsequent Horcrux, it has half of the amount of soul of the previous, and the second being that when he splits its soul, it's equally divisible between the number of fragments. If Horcruxes actually worked by halving the remaining soul each time, then the fragments would progressively shrink. The first Horcrux would contain half of Voldemort's soul, the second 1/4, the third 1/8, then 1/16, 1/32, 1/64, and finally 1/28. By that logic, Voldemort himself would ultimately be left with just 1/128th of his original soul. Alternatively, it would be split into 7 equal fragments. But neither of these estimations are correct, because there's zero evidence in canon to suggest that Horcruxes work this way. All we know is that killing, specifically murder, rips the soul apart. However, despite the fact that Voldemort did not have 1/128th of a soul left, like many believe, it doesn't mean his soul was stable. We can look to the state of Voldemort's soul fragment that Harry encounters in Limbo as evidence of that. By the time Voldemort had finished creating his Horcruxes, his soul had been torn 6 separate times intentionally, plus 1 accidental split when he tried to kill Harry as a baby. And this meant that his soul was mutilated beyond anything the magical world had ever seen. Even when he went after the Potters at the end of the First Wizarding War, his soul was in a sorry state. By that point, he'd already created multiple Horcruxes, leaving his soul deeply fractured and unstable. And when the killing curse rebounded in Godric's Hollow, that instability became obvious. Another fragment of his soul was blasted apart from the whole and latched onto the only living thing left in the room, Harry himself. In other words, Voldemort didn't intend to create a Horcrux that night. His soul was simply so damaged already that another piece tore loose on its own. Yes, he did create one more Horcrux after Godric's Hollow, the one contained in Nagini. But by that point his soul had already been fractured again by the accidental Horcrux he created in Harry. And as arrogant and sometimes reckless as Voldemort was, it's possible that even he had recognized, by this stage, the limits of what his own soul could endure. The next reason that Voldemort failed to create additional Horcruxes comes down to the same reasons that he inevitably failed at everything else: his hubris and arrogance. Just as important as the magical limitations he faced was the simple fact that he didn't believe he needed more Horcruxes, even when he had his back against the wall. To begin with, Voldemort was extraordinarily overconfident that the ones he'd already created would never be found. But even when he discovers that some had been found, he remains completely certain that no one will ever find the diadem Horcrux in the Room of Requirement. Spoiler, he's wrong about that one. Another contributing factor to this extreme confidence likely came from the extreme obscurity surrounding Horcruxes themselves. One of the only books known to even mention Horcruxes was Godelot's Magique Most Evil, a dark arts text kept in the Hogwarts library. But even that book barely discussed them. Horcruxes were considered such a vile and taboo form of magic that even books about the dark arts avoided going into detail. And Voldemort would have known and relied on this. He understood that there was almost no available information about Horcruxes in the Wizarding world, and this likely led him to another dangerous assumption, that even if someone found one, they wouldn't know how to destroy it. In other words, Voldemort didn't just rely on hiding the Horcruxes themselves, he relied on the ignorance of others. How could anyone else, besides Voldemort of course, possibly understand the intricate magic that is Horcrux creation? His inner monologue captures this overconfidence perfectly. But surely if the boy had destroyed any of his Horcruxes, he, Lord Voldemort, would have known, would have felt it. He, the greatest wizard of them all, he, the most powerful, he, the killer of Dumbledore, and of how many other worthless, nameless men. Horcruxes were the monuments to his own perceived brilliance, and at the end of the day, above all else, it was Voldemort's ego that contributed to his biggest oversights. The last and final unverified reason that Voldemort didn't make another Horcrux is that he simply didn't have enough time. No one knows how long it actually takes to make a Horcrux. Hell, we don't even have the slightest idea of what the process entails. Therefore, it's entirely possible that by the time he realizes he's lost most of them, he knows that the window to create another has already closed. Voldemort doesn't truly realize what Harry and his friends are doing until very late in Deathly Hallows, specifically after the break-in at Gringotts. But by this point, the war is reaching its climax. The Battle of Hogwarts is about to begin. Even if Voldemort had wanted to create another Horcrux at that stage, the process may have required time, preparation, and a suitable object, none of which he realistically had in the middle of a full-scale war. And by the time Voldemort finally realizes his immortality is collapsing around him, it may already have been too late to do anything about it. And that's it for today's video. If you enjoy the content, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. Until next time, remember, it does not do to dwell on dreams and forget to live.